Photography Online, the podcast.
Coming up in the next 60 minutes, we explain why a photographer recently got arrested doing his job, how an underground cave is being ruined by Instagrammers, and why a press photographer got told off at a recent event. We ask, fine art photography, what is it? In this month's big question. We try and figure out what's the point of in-camera cropping. And we ask if the world really needs a massive 4TB memory card, a Leica branded smartphone, and some Kodak Socks.
And now, please welcome your hosts for this episode of the Photography Online podcast. A man who failed to see the irony when he forgot his memory card. It's Nick Hansen.
I have it with me today.
And a man who thought the rule of thirds was an era. It's James McCormick.
Yep, that's me, all the way from the Jurassic period.
And here to keep them both in check, it's Ruth Taylor.
Hey everyone, it is Ruth. Welcome to the podcast. Welcome to our May episode. Can't believe actually that we're 5 episodes in at this stage. So good to have you all here back with us today on the podcast. Besides myself, of course, we've got Nick and James. How are you guys?
Oh, good, thank you, Ruth.
Very well, all good, thank you.
That was almost a growl, James. Is this the Jurassic period thing going on a bit further? Bit of a dinosaur theme?
Yeah, well, dinosaur, thank you. Yes, I thought you'd pick up on that. No, I've had a sip of coffee, so my larynx is lubricated and I'm good to go.
Excellent. Nick, you got your water as well?
I have, yes.
Nothing stronger than that?
No.
Excellent. All right. Well, we are going to kick off, I think, get right on with the show. Why not this time? We're going to be looking, as we said in the beginning, at some of the news stories, some of the photography news stories happening in the world over the last few weeks. We've got our big question as well. We've got lots of your comments on that, which I'm looking forward to, and of course, more besides. But let's start off with in the news. We found a few different things this month. James found this first story, which is simply titled, Olivier host tells off photographer over show a leg comment. Now, this is intriguing straight away, James. For people that are not perhaps privy to the UK news, what's this about?
Yeah, so it didn't take too much finding because it was quite big news here in the UK. So the Olivier Awards was hosted by a lady called Hannah Waddingham, who is an actress in Game of Thrones, I believe, among other things. I'm not over familiar with what she does, but she was hosting the awards, and either on the way in or the way out, there was a press corps behind a barrier, and she was standing on some steps and having a picture taken, as all celebrities do on arrival generally at these events. And a photographer shouted at her to show some leg. Now, I haven't actually heard that side of that piece of audio personally, but they did run Hannah Waddingham's response, which was that you wouldn't say that to a man. And then she marched on. Now, you know, this is quite a difficult topic to be sensitive about, because for a long time there's been a lot of collusion, both sides of that barrier between the photographers and celebrities. But in defence of Hannah Waddingham, you know, she has every right to say what she wants, and times are moving on, and the photographer probably shouldn't have said what he did. But as I said, there's been decades of collusion, both sides of that celebrity photographer barrier anyway. So I wouldn't be too hard on the photographer for saying that, even if it's not particularly 2024. But her response was quite interesting, because she said to him, "Don't be a dick." Now, I think that's quite offensive, personally, and that is her response. You know, so I think in the end, both sides probably need to have a little bit of a look at themselves about the way they behave in public. As I said, there has been this relationship between the press and celebrities for a long time, and you know, the press are not above reproach by a long stretch, and neither are celebrities, and they both rely on each other to make a living. So hopefully some positives are taken out of this. I believe the photographer wrote a letter apologising, so that's good, and I believe Miss Waddingham accepted that apology. So in the end, hopefully there'll be a positive outcome to this, and photographers won't shout such crass remarks, and celebrities will remember that they are celebrities and are there to be photographed. So
I find this quite interesting, James. So you've gone down this kind of tack straight away of she's a celebrity, therefore, and I know you've kind of veered it back, but you're kind of saying it's okay it's okay to say show a leg.
No, I'm not saying it's okay at all. No, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that it has been accepted for a long, long time. And if you look at varying comments online on the posts, there's the usual misogynistic nonsense about, well, if you wear a dress like that, what do you expect? I don't agree with that in the slightest. She can wear whatever she wants. And she doesn't. And she shouldn't have that shouted at her. But my point is that to snap a response like that at the photographer when it's been going on for a long, long time, she would have had that said to her many, many times. Not that that makes it right at all. She's perfectly allowed to, stand up for herself. Of course she is. And the world should move on from comments like that being shouted. But her response wasn't particularly well thought through. And all I'm saying is the photographer didn't think through his initial comment and her response wasn't thought through. So hopefully both sides of that barrier can learn a lesson or two from it.
I was just saying, I guess she probably didn't have a minute to think about a response. It was a knee-jerk reaction, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not attacking her in any way at all. But I think by the same tone that attacking the photographer when there has been this relationship between celebrities and photographers, and I've been in it and seen it up close and personal on the red carpet for a very, very long time. So, but, fair play to the photographer. Apparently he's written a letter of apology, and other photographers in the future will hopefully learn that just because a lady is on a red carpet, or indeed a gentleman wearing whatever it is, you don't get to say what you want to them. But as I said, her response was a bit sharp and a bit harsh on the photographer. That's all I'm saying.
All right, well, let's move on from this slightly contentious subject, which I didn't think it was contentious until you started talking and immediately you seemed to take a tack I had not anticipated. So we could go longer on this one.
So what is the tack you thought I would take, Ruth?
Well, I thought you would be immediately anti the paparazzi or whoever it was shouting something like that to someone, to anyone, woman or man, as opposed to saying they're celebrities, so they should expect it. And it's, maybe a sweeping generalization to say they work both ways, and I understand that. But for this particular lady, that's not to say, she's part of it, therefore she should just have expected it.
No, I am anti it. I think it was just a bit harsh on that one photographer to single him out and use a very light profanity against him. It was uncalled for, but sometimes with redress and things swinging the way that they need to get things back in place, these things need to be said. So, as I said, both sides of the camera will hopefully learn something from it, and a bit more respect. Both sides of the camera will develop and go forward.
All right, well, let's move on to another story that we found. This, again, to do with photographers kind of cheesing people off, shall we say. A freelance photographer who was arrested while reporting from the scene. Well, we found out later it was a scene of a murder. We didn't know at the time. It was a crime scene photographer, basically, not acting in an official capacity in that sense. But Nick, what do you make of this story? Can you explain, first of all, what happened?
Yeah, so the gentleman, as you say, is a freelance photographer, Dimitris Legakis. Hopefully I've got that right. So he was photographing the scene of a murder in Swansea in Wales when he was later detained with considerable force. So he was charged with assaulting an emergency worker, obstructing and resisting a police officer, and with a public order offence of using threatening or abusive words of behaviour. And when this got to court, basically the judge said that it seems that a police officer took offence at him taking pictures there. Obviously, sensitive moment, tension going on or whatever, around the whole subject of the murder. But again, like the last thing, this has been going on for many years, crime scene photographers.
It's a bit like the previous topic, really. It's an unfortunate circumstance, Should these things be documented? Should that photographer be at the scene? If photographers aren't at scenes, we would have missed out on thousands of iconic images, including the very famous image of the unfortunate child in Vietnam that was taken by Don McCullum, which changed the history of a war, and a prize that's just been awarded for a picture taken in Gaza. It's a very difficult one as to what constitutes journalism, what constitutes photojournalism, and that sort of thing. But the police stepping in and overstepping their authority and their rights and using nonsense to do with public order allegations against photographers is absolute rubbish, and that's what the judge threw out. So from a point of view of the photographer in question, he was let go with absolutely no further that's an end of it as far as the judicial system's concerned, and the police are having an internal investigation. But I wouldn't be too hard on the police officer either, because he's in a difficult situation there as well, and tensions are clearly running high. I just think that, again, both sides of the camera should just try and calm down a wee bit, but that is very difficult to do in a circumstance like that, as you said, Nick.
Yeah, what's interesting to me about this particular thing, reading some of the background on the article, is that when the photographer was made aware of what was happening, he was made aware initially of a car fire. He didn't know it was part of a murder investigation, and nor, I believe, initially did the police when they arrived on the scene. This was kind of tied together quite soon afterwards. But I've got family members serving and previously who've been in the police force, and I've heard stories from their point of view where you're attending a crime scene, whether or not you know how big it is or how small it is, you're attending a crime scene of some sort, you're trying to do your job, and you've got people coming in, whether that be people standing by and watching, trying to interfere, or somebody like a photographer who's then actively trying to come into a scene you're trying to work at and contain, and whether or not they've got a right to be there, there is that initial frustration of you're trying to do something, and from your point of view, someone is kind of getting in the way of that. And sometimes there's a grey area in terms of should they be here, should they not, and you don't always stand there and think, well, these are the rights and here's the freedom of it. You don't think like that. You just think, I'm trying to do this job, I'm trying to contain this scene, and someone's getting in the way. I think that's what seems to have happened there. They've obviously, I don't know whether they were manhandled or not, but they were trying to get them out of the scene, and then obviously later you go, hang on, I've got every right. But in the moment on all these things, very often, like James said, it's hard to kind of think rationally through it while it's happening. But it's an interesting one. It raises up loads of questions, like you said, about the freedom of the press to be doing things, and obviously they're allowed to do that. I
just hope, in summary, Ruth, that both sides, the police officer concerned and the photographer, it would be great to think that they could, maybe both, because I believe they're both in the Swansea area of Wales. It would be great to think that they actually would bump into each other and just shake hands and say, well, I know you were doing your job and you were doing yours, and I might have overstepped. I apologise, and then the other one says the same, and that's the end of it, really. All
right. Well, moving on to story number 3. This is not. I think it's probably one of the first months we're not doing a selfie-related death, but it is another sad loss. Actually, a photographer died this month after being swept into the sea shooting big waves. Now, this is something we've obviously not got any direct experience of, but we have got experience of shooting around big waves. Nick, in particular, I know when we're out and about doing trips in various places, we've got a lot of stringent safety expectations that are made very clear, people that we're working with. But obviously, lots of people around the place, they're going out on their own, they're seeing big events happening. What's your take on this story?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen this happen a lot, whether it's just from the actual resulting photographs or footage that you do see online of people at the coast photographing these massive waves crashing over the sea wall and what have you, and just, in my opinion, being way too close to the action. And it's just crying out, an accident or a death waiting to happen. We have been aware of something like this happening. I think we mentioned it a couple of podcasts ago about a death out on the Outer Hebrides. Lady got swept away, and that was during a workshop. So that was actually under a, in theory, controlled environment. But it's also happening, with people going out on their own doing this and just not really being aware of the strength, say, in this instance, of the sea. It can just get this big wave crashing over, take you away, and who knows what's going to happen.
Yeah, it's a sad one. James?
It is very sad, isn't it? And I know we were, as you alluded to in your intro there, Ruth, talking in one of the past podcasts about, Darwinism or whatever it was, and selfie-related deaths and things like this. But this is a slightly different situation, really, and a very, very sad one. But it, as Nick alluded to, we in the Outer Hebrides, we run trips there, and somebody did, part of another group, get swept away, and we take tremendous precautions like that. But I think one of the things to remember is that people get divided or called tourists, and it's always a tourist or a photographer that's not local to the area that's fallen into danger with the sea, as it were. Well, that's not necessarily the case, because even the locals can get a bit blasé about it as well. So whether you're new to an area or you're local to the area, if you're in somewhere that's got big waves crashing around, or you're in a remote moorland where we all live, take care and be sensible. And just abide by some common sense, really, because these stories of people losing their lives in pursuit of images, it's just not worth it. You're not there to win a Pulitzer. You're there to go home to your loved ones at the end of the day, really. So I don't know what you can say about it, really. Just watch the water, because the worst that we've had is people have their bags swamped, and that gets us cross enough, or their wellies over the top, which we certainly don't want to be involved in anything as serious as this.
Yeah, safety first. We've got another Welsh story, actually. This is unusual, but a couple of Welsh stories in the news this month. Nick, you found this one about some photographers who are under fire over littering, but in a very unusual place. What's this story all about?
Yeah, so this is in North Wales, in Gwynedd, and it's called the Cavern of Lost Souls.
Which makes me straight away want to go and visit. It sounds fascinating.
I mean, it's potentially the downside of actually bringing this, into the podcast, because hopefully it won't encourage people to go here.
Too late.
Well, yeah. So it's a flooded slate mine in North Wales, and it's being used as a dumping ground for old cars. So people are going down there and photographing it, but basically they're littering afterwards. So because it's flooded, they're using dinghies to go in here, and there's been dinghies have been left behind. And there's also been graffiti. Now, that's not to say that's the photographers I won't pigeonhole people, but, I wouldn't have thought it'd be the photographers that are doing this. And so it's ended up on YouTube videos, and they've been attracting millions of viewers, and obviously that's causing more people to go here. But even on the back of this story, on a similar littering thing, I was at the Kerrang last week, my favourite part of Skye, and I actually recorded a little video which I put on my Instagram story using some rather strong language, because I was really outraged at this. Within a small area, I saw 6, 7, 8 pieces of discarded tissue, wet wipes, just left on the ground. People are doing their business and just leaving all this mess behind. So it's obviously...
That's ladies, Nick.
Actually, that is actually what my girlfriend said at the time, because there was no other signs apart from the wet wipes and the tissues. So why is a lady going for a wee and actually wiping herself? Just don't bother by it. She doesn't do it.
Ruth's got her hands in the air. No, the funny thing is, the reason I said that is because when I looked it up, because I didn't see this story, so I believe it or not, did do some research, and I looked it up, and it said women. It blamed women for leaving things. And I just thought, how do you know it's women? And now I realise, because I didn't say that, it just said women had been defecating. And I was thinking, how would you know that? How do you know it's a woman? Now I realise. Wet wipes, giveaway.
I don't even know where to go from that. But certainly that story, Nick, is fascinating, because to me, it's originally a dumping ground. So people were dumping cars and things, but obviously it's a very photogenic dumping ground. And now what's happening is people are carrying on dumping, but the wrong kind of trash. Which is, it's an interesting one. I can see James's face. I'm sure I've said something stupid again, but never mind. They're dropping litter, but not in quite a photogenic way. But it's a fascinating place, and as I say, we don't want people to go there, obviously. But if you do go there and you see James's lost soul, possibly Marcus's might be hiding behind it, let us know. But anyway, coming up right now, we're going to leave the news stories behind, and we are going to have this month's...
The Big Question. It's a question, and it's big.
It is time for this month's big question. And again, I put this question up on our social media feeds about a week or so ago, just trying to get some of your feedback on it. The question is, fine art photography, what is it? And so I put this up on the socials. Here's just a couple of the comments from Facebook. This is from Buddy. Buddy says, it's an attempt to differentiate artful photography from snapshots taken by so many. Also, a way to charge more money for images since it's fine art photography. I've never really liked the phrase as it sounds pretentious, but there does need to be a way to separate photography that is composed in an artful manner from the masses. Steve Piggott says, I think it's the photographer's expression of what he sees in his mind. Personally, I don't like it, but I can see a lot of people do. Who is anyone in the industry to judge anyone else? Just take photos and enjoy your camera. And then a couple from Instagram. Morag said, to me, fine art is something that has been taken beyond the original image by using techniques such as blending, composites, even black and white conversion, and other techniques, but still retaining some essence of the original image. And Cool Whip says, it's regular photography, only more expensive. Now, I understand arty photography, ICM, long exposures, all that stuff. But the confusion for me when it comes to fine art photography comes from seeing what looks like a regular image, a regular landscape image, but they've labelled it as fine art photography, or they've labelled themselves as fine art photographers, where I actually can't see anything obviously arty. But Nick, I mean, what's your take on this whole fine art thing?
As the question is, what is fine art photography? I mean, can't you just class any type of photography as fine art? Because, we are creating art after all with our photographs. And as you just said there, you've seen photographs from photographers who say, fine art photography, and you see no difference. I mean, if you Google what is fine art, creative art, especially visual art, whose products are to be appreciated primarily or solely for their imagination, aesthetic, or intellectual content. But also, if you Google then fine art photography definition, it's photography created in line with the vision of the photographer as an artist, which I think was in some of the comments. But again, surely, so I was up, again, I'll mention this place on Sky, I was at the Kerrang again this morning. So I created some images, and isn't that within the vision of me as the artist? I didn't do any fancy stuff, long exposures, ICM, blending, multiple exposure or anything. So
would you label yourself fine art photographer? I mean, what is it you think that makes people want to put that title on their work?
No. I think one of the listeners mentioned it's a way of maybe adding more value to your work.
Adding some dollar signs.
Yeah, fine art. I charge maybe £50 for an A3 photograph. They're going to probably charge £200.
Well, there's an income stream for you, Nick. Just stick fine art photography by Nick Hansen and charge 5 times as much. James, what's your take on all this?
Well, I don't know. I think Nick's off to, on the right lines, really. It's 3 words apart from anything else, fine art photography, and it's only 3 words that don't actually mean anything anyway. I suppose, having been involved in the industry for a very long time, I would kind of sum it up to try and give it a genre of its own. I would be saying something along the lines of it's using a camera to create something artistic that you can use to further your own conceptual idea. So it's a paintbrush, in other words. So to me, fine art photography is really about producing something where the camera is purely a tool, and it's not necessarily documentative. It's certainly not just putting a nude in a scene. It's not excuse for a bad photo either, which it often is. It's not an excuse for a photograph that's overlit. It's not actually anything at all. As I said, it's just 3 words. So it's like calling yourself a wildlife photographer or a landscape photographer. None of these things actually really mean anything.
Well, they do in a way. If someone says they're a wildlife photographer, I expect their images to contain wildlife. Whereas fine art photography is...
Yeah, but that could be absolutely anything, couldn't it?
Yes, but anything animally, if that's a word. It does actually explain a certain genre.
As Nick said, all photography is fine art.
I wouldn't say everyone's.
Wait, that's true. Don't leave Harry alone.
I wasn't even thinking of Harry. Leave Harry alone.
Leave Harry alone. But Harry, to be fair, has a picture of an elephant, which is taken from a very low perspective. It's black and white, which means it was originally SHITE, so you don't have to bleep it, Ruth. So he turned it black and white. But actually, that would be classed as a fine art picture in many ways. It's a really nice picture of an elephant. It's from an unusual perspective. It's processed in it's processed in quite a high sort of contrasty way. It's got some good tones to it. It's quite an unusual composition. So is that fine art? I personally, I would say it was actually, and a pretty good example of it.
So my issue is seeing like landscape photographers who call themselves fine art photographers, and to me, it's maybe just a case of it sounds good as a name, as a title. But there's not much beyond that. I mean, should there be cases where the term isn't used? I
mean, I would say all the time. I just don't think it's a term that's needed to be used at all, really.
So, for example, Marcus, he's a straight shooter, let's call it that. He doesn't like adding, taking away. He likes to shoot things as is. He doesn't spend long in editing. He might turn the odd thing black and white. But in general, it's kind of a straight shot. You wouldn't call that fine art photography, would you? But other people might choose to bring that name on themselves and shoot the same kind of stuff.
No, and I think you used the word a minute ago, creative. I think that is a good word to use for fine art photography, being a bit more creative. So that comes into the realms of long exposure, Harry's different perspective and, of the elephant and the processing style of it he's being creative, so long exposure, with the intentional camera movement.
Well, that scene did not look like that scene. So that shot, I know we're talking about on a podcast here where nobody can see this elephant, but the end product that Harry produced was not what he was seeing if he'd put his eye to the side of the camera. So it wasn't a documentative shot. It's an unusual perspective. So, and he's done the same with a lion as well, actually. That just comes to mind. So that's 2 bits of credit we're giving Harry here. He did the same with a lion.
As someone said, just enjoy your photography and get on with it, which I quite liked. Next month's big question, which we will again put up on our socials, is why is photography so often expected for free? Which I'm sure a lot of people have got a lot of comments about and could actually cross over into things beyond photography as well. But that's next month's big question. So do tune back in for that and leave some comments on our socials once we pop that up. Moving on, we are halfway through the podcast. We're just going to have a look at some of the comments from last month's show, actually. From the April show, Sue saying the podcast is a great addition to my morning walk. Loving the banter of these guys. Thanks, Ruth, for your comments on the use of cotton carrier for clients of my age who sadly can't carry a lot on my back and need the hands-free ability for stability. I love it and have every confidence in the connection. This is regarding last month's podcast. We were talking about one of the gear items, which was a front-holding camera system, basically, and the guys were pretty much against it. I said I'd seen some people using them. Obviously, Sue was one, and James, you mentioned that you were not entirely confident in the clip being able to hold the weight. Sue is pretty confident in that.
Yeah, I mean, but I think I will backtrack slightly.
I like a backtrack.
You like a backtrack because although I would not wear one, and we suggested that you just put your stuff in your bag and don't have cameras swinging around. If you've got a bad back or stability issues particularly, and backpacks can knock people off balance more than anything else, if Sue can strap this thing to herself and get to places she wouldn't be able to get to otherwise, then she should definitely go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a couple of comments on that system, actually. So if you haven't heard the podcast, go back, check that out, have a wee listen to that. There's links as well in the show notes, as usual, to everything that we talk about, so you can have a wee look. Romney saying, what a treat. After years of watching this crew, we now get to listen in on the conversation without the distraction of their amazing photography and videography. The likely unintentional exposure of intergenerational tension, that's me and you, James, focus on stylistic conflict and illuminating Darwinian philosophy are both entertaining and astounding. Carry on. We do like that from you, Romney. Thank you very much. And the intergenerational comment particularly tickled me. Another one from Stuart on the podcast last month. He just said, as usual, PO crew speaking intelligently, interestingly, philosophically and understandably about all things photographic. Now, I did choose these comments and they are quite nice, so thank you. But to be fair, they nearly all have been, so we really appreciate everybody that's left a comment on the show and the podcast in general. It's great to hear from you. As we mentioned a couple of shows ago, there's people listening in from all sorts of random places. Guyana, I think, was one. All sorts of places all across the world. So it's fabulous. If you are listening from, anywhere, we just love to hear from you. Pop a comment somewhere down on the YouTube once it goes up on YouTube or whatever platform you're listening. It's always fun. Anyway, speaking of the show, last month we did a competition. It was very kindly sponsored by ThinkTank, who do wonderful, wonderful camera bags. And we don't have the camera bag nearby right now so that we can do the zip noises again, which was a lot of fun last time.
Yeah, it was very disturbing, that noise.
It was disturbing for James. Good solid zips on that bag, but we're giving away a ThinkTank camera bag, one of their brand new backlight Sprint, I believe it is, and we had a whole pile of entries. Now, I was trying to figure out if we should just pick a name and mention it or do it live, and we decided, of course, we're going to do it live. So I've got something which you can't see, but we'll put a sound effect on, and it's basically going to pick a number of everybody that's done it, and then I'm going to correspondingly check it against my name. So it's come up with 59, who is David Camden from the United Kingdom. Congratulations, David Camden.
Are you sure it's not David in Camden?
I was thinking that. It's not. I am aware Camden is down there, but no, David Camden, unless he's put it in wrong. Someone called David from the UK. We'll find you. We've got your email, David, so we'll get in touch with you. And big thanks for entering, and everybody, of course, who entered. And again, ThinkTank for giving that bag to us to give away. And of course, for sponsoring the show last month. That was fabulous. All right, well, we are going to move on with...
What is the point?
the point? What's the point?
Right, this is purely going to be Nick and James because this is definitely not my area of expertise. We're talking what's the point this month of in-camera cropping. First of all, we need an explanation of what it is. Nick or James, who wants to go?
It's down to you, Nick, to do the explaining. It's technical, mate. You know me.
I don't think it needs much explanation. It's kind of is what it says on the tin. So in-camera cropping.
But is that the right term?
Yes. So my camera, 45 megapixel camera, it has, I think it's in my menu, it is crop mode. So what it will do is crop into the image. I think you end up, so it's 45 megapixel camera normally, I think you end up with a 20 to 24 megapixel image size.
So what is the point of this particular function in a menu?
For me, there is no point. I don't even crop after the fact unless I'm going square 4x5, 16 by 9. I won't necessarily crop all the way into an image. However, if, say, you are a sports photographer who has to get the work out really quickly, or a wedding photographer.
So that's going to save you 0.01 of a second in cropping in post-production and actually maybe giving yourself a bit of left and a bit of right leeway, which you wouldn't have done if you'd cropped in camera.
Yeah. I mean, yes, you can run, you can run actions in Photoshop, against your hundreds of images and it'll do it within, a minute or whatever. I think it's just you could say it's a gimmick, for the camera manufacturers to add this. But I can see some applications, like I say, maybe sports photographers or action photographers or even wedding photographers, have to get the images out, maybe some of the images out a bit quicker.
So Nick, what's the difference, Nick, between zooming in and cropping, obviously, that way? And what's the difference between in-camera cropping and that? Because to explain it to the layman, which is me.
Okay, well, I mean, the big difference is, so if you're zooming in using the lens, you're still retaining the full quality of the sensor, so the full resolution. So my camera, 45 megapixels, if I'm just zooming in with the lens, I'm still getting a 45 megapixel image. But if I turn to crop, so if I, say, had a 50 millimeter lens and an 80 millimeter lens, I may as well switch over to an 80 millimeter lens rather than using the 50 and using the crop mode, because I'm still going to retain the full resolution of my camera.
So what is the point? Is it a visual? Is it a visual thing so you can just see what your end image is going to look like if you don't have a different zoom lens? Well, what's the reasoning behind it?
I know, like I say,
You don't know? This is why we have the feature.
I don't know if it's a gimmick. So yeah, what is the point? I don't see a point myself.
I know, we're picking on you here, Nick, as well, because on the notes and beforehand, I said we really must try and find some pros because it shouldn't always be negative. We're really struggling here, though.
In my mind, I can have alluded to it. Maybe I'm wrong. For people that need to get the work out there quickly, they can switch between, the full resolution of the sensor, and then they have only got the one lens with them. So I'll just quickly turn to the crop mode and do that. It's the same as cropping after the fact at the computer, because you're still cropping the same amount, so you're still ending up with the same amount of resolution afterwards, but it's done in that instant. It's done at the capture stage rather than then have to take it into the computer and cropping it. But at the computer stage, you could have more, you do have more leeway with exactly where you crop, whereas in camera, it's just cropping into the middle of the frame. So you still have to think about your composition.
Okay. Well, again, comments, guys, if you find crop mode is something that you use and you think it's a good thing, do let us know. We'd be really interested to hear from you on that. But moving on to our final section of the show, our gear section, which we want to call it. Does the world really need this?
Does the world really need this?
So it is time where we look at some gear, which makes a lot of people very happy. Got a lot of different things. Now, I've got a bit of an issue, I've got to say here, guys, because I don't tend to look too much at photography gear online. But I have recently had to look at all these things we've been talking about for the podcast. I am now getting a slew of targeted advertising on my social media pages for things like cotton carriers, long tripod plates, which the three-legged thing we were talking about last month, the Kickstarter. These are constantly filling up my feed now, which is causing me a bit of a problem. So I'm trying to figure out a way to look at these links on like separate browsers and all the rest of it. Anyway, these 5 I'm sure are going to feature on my socials for the next couple of months. But there is quite interesting. The first one, Nick, is this is crazy, a 4 terabyte SD card. I mean, talk to us about this. Is there any reason?
I think you've said it. It's crazy. I don't know why anyone would want one. unless they are using it to shoot video. But if we take this to a stills point of view, so if you have, say, something like a Sony A7R4, which I think is something like between a 40 and 60 megapixel camera, you'll get 31,000 raw files, uncompressed raw files on this card.
There might be a winner in there.
I mean, even, the fastest, I don't know what the fastest camera is at the moment, in terms of frames per second, we'll say maybe 30, 40, 50 frames per second. You're still not going to shoot that many images in one session, are you? And from my point of view, I would never want to use such a large card just in case it goes wrong. So I carry multiple 256 and 512 megabyte cards, and that, in my mind, is a much better way to work. Have multiple cards. It's like I have multiple hard drives. I don't just have the one hard drive. I have multiple hard drives. I have a cloud backup, so my files are in different places. Yeah, I mean, if someone was traveling for a very long time, well, even, an SD card, it weighs nothing. So just take multiple cards with you. I get, this should be, what's the point? I don't see a point.
I can see people who maybe do not have a system. Maybe they're beginner photographers and they think, "Oh, a massive card. I'll just keep everything on it always." But
no.
James, we were talking about this last month. You need a system in place, and a big card is actually a danger for many things. I
mean, principally, Nick just said what he shoots. I shoot even smaller cards actually. I have a 256 the whole time, in dual slots, so 256 in one and 64s in the other, and I'd rather just swap them out, and it takes 2 seconds to swap them out, but then you've got backups. There's only one real thing that's important in any form of memory card, or three things really: longevity, stability, and physical strength. I would rather have that on two cards than putting all my eggs on one enormous 4 terabyte basket, which
if you then lose or drop in the grass, it's gone.
Yeah, exactly, disaster. So can't see the point, I'm afraid. There might be somebody out there who needs it for a very specific niche use, but I don't know who that would be.
4K video recording is all I can think of. But
4K video recording, I can tell you actually, because I've got it here, it did say somewhere. Anyway, I can't remember what it was. It was like 10 hours or something.
Who's going to need that? I mean,
how many takes does it take us? We do everything very quickly, Nick, you and I.
Well, but now you've got your auto cue, Ruth. It's not needed anymore.
It's opening up a whole new avenue for me now, actually. I'm thinking, all those times we record the show and you're just about to get the perfect recording and Marcus goes, sorry, just run out of memory, just need to swap the cards over.
Or Ruth shouts makeup, which is what she's constantly shouting.
Oh, yeah, that's what it is. Nick and James, of course, are just, straight one-take wonders. Well, it does exist. SanDisk have got this. I'm not entirely sure it's out quite yet, but it'll be interesting to see if anybody actually goes ahead and uses that. But there's no pricing or anything on it yet. Anything to add before we decide it's a bit pointless? Not that this is what's the point. This is, does the world really need this? So what do we reckon? Does it need it?
No.
It might in the future, but right now, no.
Okay, no from Nick. Maybe James on the fence, as ever. Okay, James, moving on to another new product that we have seen. Talk to us about this.
It's a Leica phone. So it's a Lights Phone 3, I believe it's called. Is that right? Have I got the name right? You're looking, because I can actually see Ruth and she's looking bemused. It is the Lights Phone 3, isn't it, Nick? Yeah.
It is, yeah.
It looks amazing. It looks really cool. It's only available in Japan, so that's a bit of a non-starter.
So this is actually a smartphone. It's a Leica branded smartphone, obviously with Leica's, not obviously the camera quality, but it's Leica quality camera in there.
Yeah, so it's got lights glass in it, and it's a Leica branded phone, as you say, with some of their own software, which basically simulates all sorts of different old lenses that you would have possibly bolted onto a real Leica camera in the good old days. The glass lenses on it will undoubtedly be very, very good. I haven't actually seen any reviews of it, but they will be good. There's no question about that. But then again, so is the glass on the front of an iPhone. So does the world really need it? Probably not, but it looks really nice. And right in the middle on the back of it, there's a little red Leica badge. So I want one. It's got to be a lady killer, that phone, hasn't it?
For your birthday this year, James, I'll send you a pack of stickers, red dots, and you can just put them on whatever you want.
Oh, I thought I was getting a phone. I've got some red dot stickers and I thought you were going to get me the phone.
No, my budget doesn't extend to the phone. The red dot stickers, perhaps I could stretch to. That'd make you a very happy man. You could stick them on various things. Nick, have you had a look at this one at all?
I have, yeah. One thing to know, one of the pages I looked at, it said it's actually a rebranded Sharp Aquos R8 Pro.
So it's a different phone with a new cover.
Exactly, yeah, because it has got the nice kind of textured cover on it, which I guess it would be on like an old Leica camera as well. So it's got the red dot and the texture, the feel of a Leica camera.
I want one.
This is important. James wants one. It's got a nice cover. It's got the red dot, and no doubt the quality will be actually very, very good. If anybody out there wants to send us one to compare to the iPhones or anything else, you're very welcome. Just get in touch. The next thing is something that I definitely think the world needs, or at least I would quite like, and I think possibly James as well, because James has got a bit of a thing for flashy socks. Kodak have released, among some other actually clothing items, but they've released some branded socks, which look very funky. They're like a dark yellow with red stripes. They say Kodak along them. They just look cool, James.
Well, you've got to follow the links and have a look at them, because there's 2 or 3 things that come to mind here. Firstly, Nick wears a horrendously hideous yellow jacket or yellow bag or some combination of yellow, and it would actually set off really nicely underneath your slightly short blue trousers, Nick. So that would be good for you. The other thing is that I've changed my mind, Ruth, because on our varying WhatsApps, I said I wouldn't want them. I do want them.
Excellent.
Because I've realised that the only other socks I do have are the ones you gave me for my birthday, and they have their team's faces embroidered onto them. So, do I really want to walk? Does the world need socks with Ruth, Harry, Nick, Marcus's face on them, or does it need Kodak ones? Well, I need Kodak ones if that's the choice. Right.
This is deeply upsetting. If you don't want the socks I spent so long carefully cutting out templates of our faces for, send them back. We'll auction them off on the Photography Online socials. And
we could, couldn't we? Yeah.
We could buy some Kodak Socks instead out of them. But they're kind of fun. They've actually released some other clothing items. We talked about this a few shows back when Canon released a music EP. It's just all these random things that camera companies release that are not remotely photography related. Kodak, I think, has got to that stage where it's trendy and it's funky and it
looks retro. They do look cool.
It's retro. That's the word. The only thing I would say is they've got a little label on the side which probably will be very scratchy, but I am willing to test that theory. So once they come out, I'll possibly be getting a pair.
I was actually going to order a pair myself. They're £18 UK British pounds.
What?
And the postage was £19. I was going to order a pair, but I thought, no, you pay more for the postage, so maybe not. Unless you buy multiple pairs.
£18 for the socks and £19 for the postage. Right, that's
so we'll just have to buy a pair each.
We'll club together, Nick, you and I, and we can get joint postage up to the Isle of Skye, and maybe we can fork out £8 each.
Oh yeah, it'll be more postage for the Highlands and Islands. It'll be even more for you.
Never even thought about that. If anybody out there wants to send us a pair for review purposes, Nick and I will wear a sock each, and we'll test them out. Anyway, they're kind of fun. Have a look at them in the show notes if you want to. The next item is one which, James, you sent this through to me a few days ago, and the link was actually for a few different items. But explain to me what it is that you found, which you're quite excited about, I think.
Well, it's called a SpeediGimbal, and it's basically a way of attaching a large piece of glass to a monopod. In a speedy way, as it suggests. So it's a ball and socket, but the socket is not, the ball is not stuck inside the socket. So the two things are detachable, and you have the ball on top of your monopod, and you can walk around with that with lots of freedom, using it as a walking pole, whilst you can have your long piece of glass on a shoulder strap or whatever it is, and then when the action happens, you see something, you can literally pop the socket onto the ball and you have got a monopod with lots of freedom of movement, basically. So it's really very simple, but actually very clever. And the reason it got me excited, as you said, is that I put together something like this quite a long time ago, Heath Robinson styley, in my garage, bolting things together. And one of the reasons I did it was that actually I had a simple one-axis head on top of a monopod, and that sheared off, actually. But luckily, I had this, so the weight of the camera sheared off when I had it resting over my shoulder. So the monopod on my shoulder with the lens on the top of it, and that weight sheared it off. But because I had the strap attached, the lens didn't hit the ground, luckily. Otherwise, it would have been incredibly expensive. So I ended up bolting this whole thing together. But you still have to then, either with an Arca Swiss plate or whatever, tie a very expensive and very heavy piece of glass to the top of a monopod and then undo it and when you want to move, as it were, or risk having it over your shoulder. So what this does is it solves that problem. It makes it very, very quick and speedy, and it gives you a separate walking pole, i.e. the monopod, and when you see something, you just pop it on top and you can shoot almost instantly. It's really very, very simple and very, very clever.
So one half's on the monopod, one half's on the camera. You just bring them together when you need to. I'm fascinated to know, you said you made your own. What did you use for did you have a golf ball? What was tell me.
No, I didn't know. It was a single axis. You can get a single axis head. So it only tilts from front to back. That was on top of the monopod because that's the only axis you really need on a monopod, because on a monopod you can either lean it to the side, and then you use, on big glass, you have a collar anyway, so the camera can be corrected by using the collar. So what I did is that single head that was on top of the monopod, that's where it sheared off. The thread got pulled, basically. So I bolted it all the way around to the top of the monopods with some huge, great big bolts so that it could never shear off. And it's not uncommon for cameras to thread bolts on top if you're using a lot of weight like that. So this solves that problem, and it's really, really very clever. And I like, personally, as you alluded to earlier in the podcast, in my dotage, I'm getting used to walking with. I quite like walking with a pole or a stick now.
This also explains your fear of clips when we were talking about the cotton carrier. If you've had a camera before on something and it's actually, the weight of it's managed to pull it off. But you did say that your camera strap saved it. And on last month's podcast, you were banging on about how irrelevant camera straps were. So
they are irrelevant on a camera because the strap was actually attached to the lens.
Oh, fascinating. Okay.
So there you are. You thought you caught me out and you didn't. And the reason that lens had a strap on it was that strap would hang down the monopod and be Velcro to the monopod. So if it sheared, that's what saved the camera from hitting the ground. I no longer need a strap on that lens.
All right. Well, the SpeediGimbal, that's called.
Yeah, it's worth a look at.
Yeah. Nick, have you had a look at this? Is it something you would find useful?
I have, yes. And I was a bit dubious to begin with, but when you watch the various videos on the website, the gentleman who created it just works. I know I'm using that phrase from another manufacturer, but it just works, and it seems a really good idea. Because I used to do a lot more wildlife photography, and I'd have a tripod with a big gimbal on the top, with a 500mm lens attached to it, big, bulky, heavy. With this, I don't know what weight. It's probably going to be a couple of 100 grams in weight. And they're just even more versatile, as James has said. If you just got like a monopod, you see your wildlife subject, whatever it may be, quickly, lens on top, and away you go. You've got that full kind of freedom movement. Whether it's going to be as slick, as smooth as a gimbal, who knows? Maybe the gentleman can send us one to try out.
We sound like we're begging an awful lot on this particular one, but there's some good stuff out there. There's some interesting stuff out there. So again, check out the link if you want to see it for yourself. Our final item in Does the World Really Need This is a camera that can take how many frames a second, James? Because you found this one.
Well, I did. I don't understand anything about it because it's from MIT, the Massachusetts Institute, I can't even say it, let alone understand anything to do with it, but it's from MIT in America, where all the big-brained people go. And they've created a camera that can photograph 1 trillion frames per second. Now, they created it specifically to photograph light, which I didn't think was technically possible, but... This
is why James struggles with photography. He doesn't realise that you can actually photograph light.
What, photograph light?
You do realise this is, intrinsic...
Speeding light. Thank you.
Photons, I believe, is what they're actually photographing, yes.
Yes, exactly. I just thought with the technology from when I started, it was, the biggest motor drive was something you bolted onto the bottom of your camera. It was a separate entity that you actually screwed onto the bottom of a film camera, and that would do maybe 4 frames a second, 5 frames a second at maximum. And now, what's your R6 doing, Nick? R5, sorry.
20 to 30 frames per second, yeah.
I don't know where we'll be in 10, 15 years' time, but this thing's doing 1 trillion. So, our old colleague Harry, he might actually get, a good moment.
I've just found a reason for the 4 terabyte SD card.
Oh?
The camera that does 1 trillion frames per second.
Ah.
There you go.
They're working in conjunction, perhaps. So if you ever get your hands on this 1 trillion frames a second, maybe we'll get a fork out for a 4 terabyte SD card to go with
I'd rather they sent us one of these than a monopod thing, to be honest, because I reckon I'd get more for this on eBay.
But I mean, of course, obviously, this camera is not an SLR or a mirrorless camera, is it? As you say, it's for photographing light. And one of the things they put into context was if you were to photograph a bullet shot from a gun through water, the actual resulting movie would last 1 year to watch it back because it's 1 trillion frames per second. So if you filmed that and you wanted to sit there and watch it back, it would take a year.
It's a bit like it feels listening to this podcast.
But the actual potential uses for it, as again, from what I've read, they talk about fire and rescue and vehicles able to see around corner because of the fact that it can bounce off objects. So it does have potential, real world uses to it. It's not for us normal photographers, shall we say.
It's not us trying to get that picture of the bird in flight specifically.
No.
1 trillion frames of a bird in flight would be hilarious.
Anyway, well, I think that's about it for our podcast this month, actually. That wraps up our gear section. Does the world really need this? We decided it does need some Kodak Socks, perhaps an SD card, if you've got the camera to go with it.
So I'm sorry to interrupt, Ruth, but after all of that, the only takeaway from this whole podcast is the world really needs a pair of Kodak socks, a pair of yellow socks. Is that it?
Well, they're fabulous. Go and have a look at them. I'm not on commission, by the way. I wish I was, but no, they look quite cool. Anyway, coming up on the main show on Main Photography Online in June, carrying on, of course, with the national parks. I think we're on day 6. I'm getting slightly confused at this stage, which must mean we're pretty close to the end of it. I don't know what the smell is like in the camper van at this stage, but I know they were getting slightly tired, shall we say, of each other, possibly, and tired in general at this stage, so it's going to be a good one. Now, we're talking panning. I think James in Cuba, he shot a feature on panning, so that's going to be happening, and Marcus was walking through some saloon doors, was all I've seen, which I'm sure there's a lot more to it than that. So all that and more coming up in our next episode of Photography Online. But thank you so much for joining us again, Nick, obviously, and James, thanks for joining us. Next month, I think we have got Harry and Marcus, so that's looking like another good one. So do tune back in for that. As ever, as we've been saying, links to what we've been talking about are in the show notes. If you want to leave a comment, we'd love to hear from you as well. And congratulations again to the winner of our ThinkTank camera bag. We will be in touch with you to let you know how we can get that to you. So until next time, take good care, but most of all, take good photos.
The Photography Online Podcast.